Hi everyone! In this video, we'll see the evolution of the Japanese language by examining the significant differences between Old Japanese and Modern Japanese. We'll cover writing systems, phonology, grammar, vocabulary, and stylistic variations. But first, what do I mean when I say Old Japanese? In this video, the comparison I'll make will be essentially between the Japanese used in the 8th century documents and the modern Japanese. But I'm gonna talk a bit about history to understand what happened between them and what influences did it get. The earliest form of Japanese we can study is namely Old Japanese, which was spoken in the 8th century. This was when Japan was just starting to form as a country. Buddhism came from China through Korea, bringing with it a huge cultural impact, including Chinese way of writing. At first, the Japanese used Chinese characters, called kanji, only to write classical Chinese. But then, they cleverly found a way to use these characters just for their sounds, to write Japanese. This system was called Manyogana. Here's how Manyogana worked. The Japanese took Chinese characters. As you may know, one character equals one syllable equals one meaning. But instead of using a Chinese character for what it meant in Chinese, they used it only for its sound to write Japanese words. They ignored the meaning of the character. For example, let's say the Japanese wanted to write the sound ka. They might choose this Chinese character, which in Chinese means to add, but would be pronounced something close enough to ka at that time. So they would write it not to mean add, but just to represent the sound ka. But the difficulty is that they mixed it with more regular usages of Chinese characters. For example, if they wanted to write the word yama, meaning mountain, instead of using two Chinese characters, one for the sound ya, the other for the sound ma, they would simply use the Chinese character meaning mountain, but they would pronounce it yama. So at that time, the usage they made of Chinese characters was either ignoring the meaning using the pronunciation, using the meaning ignoring the pronunciation, or, for Chinese borrowed words, using both the meaning and the pronunciation. This difficult to use writing system is found in old books like the Kojiki, Nihon Shoki, and especially the big collection of poems called Manyoshu, meaning collection of 10,000 leaves, hence the name Manyogana for the script, the Gana part meaning something like fake name. Because Manyogana used different characters for sounds that later became the same, it helps linguists figure out what Old Japanese sounded like. Next came Early Middle Japanese from the Heian period, from 794 to 1185. This was a peaceful time of fancy court life, strong rule, and great art. The court focused on developing its own culture, though it still borrowed some things from China. The biggest change for the language was the creation of Japan's two phonetic writing systems, hiragana and katakana. Both contain the word kana, so they are called kana. These were made by simplifying Chinese characters. Hiragana became the main way to write Japanese words or grammatical endings when mixed with Chinese characters. It was used a lot by women writers at the court to write stories. This is why famous books like The Tale of Genji were mostly written in hiragana. Katakana, another kind of simplification, was used more for scholarly notes and religious texts. The main difference is that hiragana are simplifications of entire Chinese characters, while katakana simplify parts of characters. Even though the way people spoke was changing, writing often stuck to historical kana usage, keeping older spellings that showed how words used to sound. Then the late Middle Japanese period, approximately between 1185 to 1600, was a time of endless war. Power shifted from the elegant court to warrior lords, starting a system where strong families ruled different areas. Japan also started to have limited contact with Europeans, Portuguese, Spanish, and later Dutch traders and missionaries. This brought the first European words into Japanese, mainly for new goods and religious ideas. This period of division also saw more differences develop between dialects. Then came early modern Japanese during the Edo period from 1600 to 1868. This was a long time of peace, with Japan mostly closed off from the world under the Tokugawa government. Edo, the actual Tokyo, became the main city for politics and culture. As cities grew, a lively culture for common people developed. Most importantly, the way people spoke in Edo became more important and was slowly seen as the main way to speak Japanese. Also, more popular stories and plays were written using language closer to everyday speech. This dialect became the direct basis for the modern Japanese we know today. Finally, we have modern Japanese, from the Meiji Restoration in 1868 till today. This was a time when Japan quickly modernized and opened up to the world. The old warrior government was replaced, and Japan quickly became a modern country, often borrowing from Western countries. This included big social and technological changes. A very important movement called Genbun Ichi, meaning unification of spoken and written language, was aimed to make written Japanese just like spoken Japanese. This changed how books and newspapers were written, making them much easier for everyone to read. The Tokyo dialect was officially made the standard language for the whole country, taught in schools and spread through newspapers and radio. After WW2, there were more language changes. Some complex kanji characters were simplified, and a basic list of common kanji was made to help everyone read and write. Also, the spelling rules for hiragana and katakana were changed to match how words are pronounced today, moving away from the old historical spellings. Today, with globalization, many new words, especially from English, keep entering the Japanese language, written in katakana, showing how the language keeps changing even now. Now we're gonna talk about the differences between the oldest known form of Japanese, being the 8th century Old Japanese, and modern Japanese. We'll start with the phonological differences. Most linguists believe that Old Japanese had 8 distinct vowel sounds. They were first the familiar 5, a, e, I, O, U. But then there were 3 more. These were often called type B vowels because they were written with different Chinese characters even if they seem to be the same vowel today in Japanese. So there were 2 types of E sounds, 2 types of I sounds, and 2 types of O sounds. This means that a word like ki, meaning tree, wouldn't be pronounced then exactly like modern ki, but with a sound relatively close to I. While the type A sounds are probably similar to the modern E, I, and O sounds, we're not exactly sure how the type B sounds were like. Some believe these differences came from earlier sounds that combined in specific ways. For example, the second E sound might have been like a very quick ye or we that later simplified to E. Today, modern Japanese has a clear and simple system of only 5 vowel sounds: a, e, I, o, u. The extra 3 vowels from Old Japanese have merged into the modern counterparts. So the different E sounds from Old Japanese became the single E sound we know today, and similarly for I and O. While modern Japanese lost 3 vowel types, it gained something important: vowel length. This means whether a vowel is held for a short or a long time can change the meaning of a word. For example, obasan meaning out with a short a, obaasan grandmother with a long a, yuki snow with a short u, yuki courage with a long u. This short versus long difference is important in modern Japanese phonology. Old Japanese most likely didn't have this clear phonemic length distinction in the same way. As for consonants, Old Japanese had a fairly simple set of consonants, around 13. Many of them are familiar to us today, like p, t, k, m, n, r, w, y. However, some of the voiced consonants were often pronounced as prenasalized in Old Japanese, like by saying a tiny m before a b or a tiny n before a d. So b might have sounded like mb, d like nd, g like ng, and z like nz. This basically means the air was briefly sent through the nose before the main consonant sound. Modern Japanese has a similar set of basic consonants, but with some key differences in how they behave and how we produce them. For voiced consonants, the old prenasalized sounds like mb have become simple voiced sounds like b or d. The nasal part has disappeared from the start of the sound. One of the biggest changes is palatalization. When certain consonants like t, d, s, d, also pronounced z, or h, are followed by an e vowel or a y sound, they often change. T becomes chi, D becomes G, Z also becomes G, C becomes she, and he becomes something like he. For German speakers, it's kinda like the word ich, but in reversed. When followed by a y sound, it includes more consonants, like k becoming kya or n becoming nya. Old Japanese did not have this widespread palatalization, so a word like kya would have been more like kia in Old Japanese. As we've seen, the sound h has become very soft before an e sound, but it's also the case before an u sound, like in hu, which is usually a sound made by blowing through the lips but without touching them. It's not hu, it's hu. That's why it's usually transcribed with an f. There's also a lot of allophones in modern Japanese. It means a single sound can be pronounced slightly differently depending on where it is in the word. For example, high vowels e and u are often devoiced when they are between voiceless consonants, like this word pronounced like ski rather than suki, or shita rather than shita. But it's not an exact science and it depends a lot on the accent or even the social identity. If you've watched movies about Yakuza, you notice that they tend to pronounce the r sound more drilled. These allophones were less prominent or maybe not that present in Old Japanese. Now let's turn our attention to how all these individual sounds fit together to form words. The rule for syllables in Old Japanese was very simple. Almost every syllable had to be a consonant plus a vowel. For example, a word like sakura, cherry blossom, would be sa-ku-ra. There were very few exceptions. You almost never found two vowels next to each other or a consonant at the end of a syllable. This made Old Japanese sound very open and flowing. Modern Japanese has a more complex but still very regular system called mora timing. Instead of just counting syllables, Japanese counts moras. Here are the rules. Most syllables are one mora with one consonant followed by one vowel, like ka, shi, su. A long vowel, like in oba-san, counts as two moras, so it's not o, ba, sa, n, but it's o, ba, a, sa, n. So a is two moras, not one long vowel in one syllable. As for geminate consonants, so double consonants, they are very common in modern Japanese, like in kitto, meaning surely. The small letter tsu before a syllable indicates that the consonant is doubled, and this geminate consonant itself counts as one mora. So in kitto, it's ki, ts, to. There are three moras. Old Japanese most likely did not have these geminate consonants. And finally, in modern Japanese there is a special sound. As you know, all letters in the kana system represent syllables composed with one consonant followed by a vowel. But there is also the ng sound called hatsuon, which represents only the consonant ng. And this lonely consonant also counts as one mora. So in hatsuon it's ha, tsu, o, ng. There is four moras. These many phonological differences may be partially connected with Chinese borrowings. By adopting Chinese words into the vocabulary, the language started allowing new syllable shapes, like those ending in ng or having a double consonant. This was probably a major force in changing the syllable structure. So far, we've seen how the individual sounds of Japanese have changed and how they combine, but language isn't just about individual sounds or even syllables, it's also about the melody and rhythm of speech. This brings us to another key difference, the pitch accent. But first, what is pitch accent? Pitch accent is simply about the pitch of your voice, whether it's high or low. In Japanese, this can sometimes change the meaning of a word, even if the sounds are otherwise the same. For 8th century Old Japanese, linguists don't have a direct clear evidence to fully reconstruct its pitch accent system. However, based on early Middle Japanese, also called Late Old Japanese, it's widely believed that some form of pitch accent was already present or developing, but it might not have been as rigid or as well documented as in later periods. Modern Japanese is a pitch accent language. This means that certain moras in a word are pronounced with a higher or lower pitch. For example, hashi means bridge, and hashi means chopsticks. Note that the pitch accent isn't the same depending on the dialect, and some don't even have a real pitch accent system. Beyond vowels, consonants, syllables, and pitch, several other sound changes transform Japanese. Sometimes when two vowels came together, they fused into a single longer vowel. Old Japanese had word endings like au or ou. Over time, these often became modern Japanese long o. For example, a word that was once kaku became kau, and then modern ko, meaning like this. This contributed to the development of long vowels. Now there is also rendaku. This is a famous rule in modern Japanese. When certain words combine, the first sound of the second word often becomes voiced. That's why the word kana, when it's combined with kata, it becomes katakana. But when it's combined with hira, it becomes hiragana. We've now seen the main sound transformations from Old Japanese to Modern Japanese. Now let's shift our focus from the phonological field to the grammatical one, to discover how the rules for building sentences have evolved over centuries. Both Old and Modern Japanese are agglutinative languages. This means that words are formed by sticking together many small parts to express different meanings. Both also follow the subject-object-verb order. And in both languages, modifiers like adjectives or relative clauses come before the words they describe. While the basic word order remained the same, verbs are where Old Japanese and Modern Japanese show some differences. Old Japanese had 8 main verb classes or groups. Each class had slightly different rules for how verbs change their endings. It also had a system with 6 basic inflected forms. These forms were used to connect verbs to different auxiliary verbs or to end a sentence in a particular way. So to summarize, there was 8 verb classes, each divided into 6 inflected forms. One crucial distinction was between the terminal form, shushike, used to end a sentence, and the attributive form, rentaike, used when the verb modified the noun that followed it. These forms were often similar. Kaku otoko, the man who writes. Otoko kaku, the man writes. But for some verbs they differed, like otoko oyu, the man is aging, but oyuru otoko, the man who is aging. Modern Japanese simplified from 8 verb classes to 3 main verb classes. Godan verbs, or u verbs, changed their vowel sounds in conjugation. For example, yomu, to read, becomes yomimasu in the polite form, yonda in the past tense, etc. Ichidan verbs, or ru verbs, always keep the same vowel sound before the ru ending. For example, tateru, to build, becomes
立てます。
tateta, and so on. As for irregular verbs, there are just 2 main ones, suru, to do, and kuru, to come, which have unique changes. When it comes to the inflection forms, modern Japanese grammar still use the concept, but nowadays it's more simple. For example, the terminal and attributive forms in modern Japanese have largely merged. For most verbs, the dictionary form ending in u is used both to end a sentence and to modify a noun. For example, with the reflex of Old Japanese oyu in modern Japanese, otoko wa oiru, the man is aging, oiru otoko, the man who is aging. As for the rest, both languages use grammatical suffixes and auxiliary verbs to show tense and aspects. Both also use particles to show the role of words in the sentence or to add nuances, but Old Japanese did have more particles for subject and object, which could add more nuances to the sentence. Some of these particles are still used in modern Japanese, but mostly in formal written texts. Now when it comes to adjectives, Old Japanese adjectives had a more complex inflection system, almost like verbs. They had bases that changed, similar to the verb system. The complex inflectional system of Old Japanese adjectives largely simplified over time. In modern Japanese, there are 2 clear types. E adjectives, which are the most common type and always end in E in their dictionary form, for example, akai, red, oki, big, and na adjectives, or adjectival nouns. These are like nouns that can describe other nouns when the particle na, meaning to be, is added. For example, kirei na hana, beautiful flower. The main difference is that they don't inflect themselves. Instead, it's the copula after the adjective that inflects. Finally, the sound changes had an impact on the grammar, and it's visible in the phenomenon called onbin. In modern Japanese, the suffixes are more fused with the root word than it was in Old Japanese, where all the components could be clearly distinguished. We can see it in the way it forms the past tense. We went from kaku, to write, kakitari, wrote, to kaku, kaita. Note that apart from the dropping of the final ri, the last k of the root word disappeared to sound more smooth. Of course, the concept is more complex, but it's a way to understand a part of it simply. Now we're going to shift from grammatical evolution to a very different kind of evolution, one driven by social dynamics and human relationships. How we show respect or humility in language is a key part of Japanese culture. This system, called Keigo, is very different between old and modern Japanese. Modern Japanese has a very highly developed and grammatically complex Keigo system. It's crucial for showing respect, humility, and maintaining social harmony. It has three main categories. Number 1. Teinego, polite language. It's achieved mainly by adding mas to verbs and using des for the copula. This is the everyday polite form, and the form usually taught in Japanese lessons. Number 2. Sonkeigo, respectful language. It elevates the status of the person being spoken to or spoken about. It uses honorific prefixes like o or go, passive forms used honorifically, but also special honorific verbs like irasharu replacing iku, kuru, and iru, respectively meaning to go, to come, to be. If you've been to Japan, when you enter a shop and they say irashaimase, it's literally the polite form to say come in. Number 3. Kanjogo, humble language. It humbles the speaker's own actions or items to show respect to the listener or the person being spoken about. It uses humble prefixes and special humble verbs like mairu for iku and kuru, meaning to go and to come when speaking about oneself. The choice of Keigo depends on complex factors like social rank, individual relationships, and familiarity. The formal, highly grammaticalized Keigo system of modern Japanese did not exist in the same way at the time of Old Japanese in the 8th century. Politeness and social ranks were expressed more through specific vocabulary choices rather than grammatical rules. The system for referring to people with pronouns or titles was also different, and a clear standardized system for showing politeness through verb endings was not yet in place. Now that we've seen some of the grammatical feature differences between Old and Modern Japanese, we'll talk about the evolution of the vocabulary and the loanwords. First of all, as far as we know, before Japan started borrowing many words from other countries, its language was vastly made up of what we now call wago, or Yamato kotoba. These are the original native Japanese words. They were the main words used for everyday things, and they were the core of the language. These words often had multiple syllables, following a pattern of consonant vowel, like kokoro, meaning hurt. Some very basic words from this time are still common today. For example, te, meaning hand, and ashi, meaning foot, were used in the 8th century and are still used today. This shows that some core words usually stay the same for a very long time. But while many Yamato kotoba words are still used, some have become less common or have changed their meaning. For example, an old word for toilet was kawaya, the river house, but now people often use otearai, the hand washing, or toire, borrowed from English toilets. As we've seen earlier, in the 8th century, Japan already had a strong connection with China, especially the Tang dynasty. As Japan borrowed the Chinese writing system, it also borrowed ideas and knowledge, thus new words to express new concepts. All these Chinese words adopted into the Japanese language are called kango. Kango quickly became a big part of the Japanese language, especially for more complex or formal topics. They make up about 60% of words in Japanese dictionaries, but only about 20% of words when used in daily talk. Usually, the more specialized the topic is, the more Chinese words will be used. When Japanese people used Chinese characters to write Chinese words, they tried to say them in a way that sounded like the original Chinese. This is called onyomi, sound reading. There are different ways to say these words depending on when and from where in China they were borrowed. For example, Goun readings came earlier, 5th to 6th centuries, often with Buddhism, and Kangon readings came later, 7th to 9th centuries, from the Tang capital. Japanese scholars also found a way to use Chinese characters to write native Japanese words based on their meaning, not their sound. This is called kunyomi, meaning reading. Now here's something interesting. Not all kango were directly borrowed from China. Japanese people also created many new words using Chinese characters and their onyomi readings. These are called wasei kango, literally Japanese-made Chinese words. Many wasei kango were created during a time called the Meiji Restoration in the late 1800s, when Japan was rapidly learning from Western countries. They needed words for new ideas like science, kagaku, or telephone, denwa. These words were so useful that some even went back to China, Korea, and Vietnam. Now the fastest growing group of borrowed words, the gairaigo, are words from foreign languages other than Chinese. Some came from Portuguese and Dutch during the Age of Discovery, then more came from German and French during the Meiji Restoration and the Westernization of Japan. But the biggest influence by far is English, especially after World War II. English words make up over 80% of all gairaigo. Japanese people use gairaigo for new things that didn't exist before, like computer or television, but they also use them because they sound more modern or fashionable, even if a Japanese word already exists. Just like with kango, Japanese speakers also create new words using English parts to describe Japanese concepts. These are called wasei-eigo, Japanese-made English words. These words might not be understood entirely by native English speakers because their meaning has changed in Japanese. Examples include sarariman, a male office worker, or kombini, a convenience store. In short, Japanese vocabulary has grown and changed a lot. It started with native words, then added many Chinese words, and now has a large number of Western words. Now that we've slightly traced the evolution of Japanese through writing, phonology, grammar, and vocabulary, we have a better idea of how it transformed from its ancient roots into the distinct language spoken today. And it shows that even a language developing on an island is not free from influence and change. So what does that say for those spoken on big continents? That's all for today. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. That's the best you can do to support the channel. See ya!